I do not know how I'm going to get through this one, so apologies in advance. As you may know, every Friday I put out a show where we go over the 4 most important news stories of the week in like luxury and streetwear, stuff like that. This week, there's one story. This year even, you know what I mean? And you probably know what it is. Virgil Abloh very recently passed away. It was a very rare, supposedly, and aggressive form of heart cancer, which is like heartbreaking. From everything I've read, it sounds like that is very painful, and it breaks my heart to think about. But this is a video about Virgil Abloh and why he was so important. We'll get into it, okay? So who was Virgil Abloh? Well, he studied civil engineering and architecture. That was like his baseline and where he came into this whole thing from. But pretty quickly, he kind of started transitioning into fashion. He was an intern at Fendi, which is a luxury Italian brand. And actually at the same time, Kanye West was also interning for Fendi, which was kind of crazy when you think about it. So they meet there. Obviously, they hit it off. Right off the bat, they have very similar sensibilities and preferences, stuff like that. So after that, Virgil became the creative director of Donda. And Donda, not like the new Kanye album, but that at the time was Kanye's line. It was his brand. So that really got Virgil into the fashion game, which he then kind of parlayed into brands like Bin Trill. That was like a collective with Heron Preston, who's of course the designer of Heron Preston, and Matthew M. Williams, now at Alix, and Givenchy. Around this time, Virgil also started Pyrex Vision, which was a very kind of like streetwear focused brand. And if you look back at that stuff now, it's like, you can see it's prototypical Off-White. And Pyrex Vision eventually closed, and Virgil started Off-White, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And most recently, I think in 2018, Virgil became the creative director for Louis Vuitton menswear, and that really blew him up into the stratosphere. Like, that's one of the biggest jobs in fashion, period. So he had a crazy impressive career in fashion. But he wasn't just in fashion. Obviously, there's the architecture, but he was also an artist. He had shows at the ICA, I believe it's called. Figures of Speech was a really cool art show that he did. He was a DJ, airplane designer for Drake, and like way more. If it was a creative discipline, Virgil was all about it. And he was just important as hell to everything we care about in fashion and art. But was he perfect? No. Like, I just don't buy into how people turn everyone into a saint as soon as they pass away. Obviously, stuff like this, it softens the edges, but people are still flawed by nature. Everyone has flaws, and Virgil was no exception. Like, I will say, I really appreciate Virgil for bringing postmodernism to fashion. Fashion is so, like, rigid sometimes and formalist, but postmodernism is all about breaking those boxes and also has a very different point of view, especially in terms of what's fair game and what isn't. And along those lines, sometimes Virgil, I think, went too far. Like, it's clear that he believed that everything was up for grabs for inspiration and even like copying, if you will. I've said this before, but Virgil had a famous like 3% rule where he said if you took a piece of art and changed it by 3%, that makes it like a new original piece of art. And I think it's a cool idea, and I can see where it could be valid, but sometimes it didn't always feel that way. Like, it gets trickier when you're taking recent designs from peers of yours, like Kirby from Pierre Moss. There's some side-by-sides that are pretty striking. Like, while doing that copying was consistent with Virgil's whole design philosophy and postmodernism and stuff, it probably didn't feel very ethical to the people he copied. And that's like a lateral move, taking from somebody on a similar-ish level to you. But what about like people underneath you, even way underneath you? Like, tiny, tiny up-and-coming small brands and even like applicants for internships. At that point, it's like, it's not really postmodernism. It's a bit closer to exploitation, because imagine that you out there, you come up with this great new idea and Jeff Bezos comes along and copies it. But he's like, hey, I'm just doing some postmodern stuff there, bro. It's no big deal. Like, that probably feels pretty hollow. You know what I mean? Like, it's a whole other thing. So taking from people beneath you is like kind of sketchy to me. But now, like now where we stand now, knowing what we know with him not here anymore, those things are really minor blips in the story of Virgil Abloh. What will be remembered most is the work, and even more importantly, the influence. Because without Virgil, we would not have Heron Preston and Alix and Rude, maybe even Palm Angels, Fear of God, and countless others. Like, I'm sure most of those would still exist without Virgil, but they would not be what they are. They would not be accepted, like, within the fashion world. They'd be their own separate thing. Virgil really bridged those two worlds in a way that no one else was ever able to do. Like, without Virgil, we would not be seeing sneakers and tracksuits and stuff like that everywhere on the runways of Paris and Milan. Like, streetwear in luxury fashion, that conversation does not begin without Virgil Abloh. And also without Virgil, there would be far less people of color in fashion. Like, that may end up being his greatest legacy, and I hope it is. He lifted so many people up. I think within like luxury, he was probably the greatest advocate for people of color at the top of that industry. And when you look back, you start to realize he didn't just want to do that. He probably felt like he needed to. He probably realized that he had a short amount of time to change things for the better and create the fashion industry that he wanted to see, that he wanted to exist in, but knew that he wouldn't for much longer. And he also recently sold a majority of Off-White to the Louis Vuitton parent company, Lvmh. And I'm sure part of that meant taking care of his family for life, which is incredible. But it also set him up at Lvmh to promote designers that he respected and wanted to see more from. And I really hope that that work will continue. And I'm sure it will. Like, it would be crazy if it didn't. Listen, Lvmh and other people who worked with Abloh, keep this work going. Please make sure that is his legacy. And he also set up things like the scholarship, and I really expect that to keep going, and I hope it does. And looking at the messages his friends and colleagues have posted since he passed, you get the impression that he was always collaborating, always talking with others in the scene. And not just collaborating in the sense of creating collaborative pieces, although he did a ton of that, maybe more than anyone else. But he was just always in conversation with people he liked or people that he wanted to see do good work. Like, just a couple months ago, Virgil was on the jury for the Lvmh Prize, which is a really, really respected prize for up-and-coming designers. Like, there's a new Lvmh Prize video on YouTube about that, where you can see him and the designers and stuff, and please watch that if you haven't seen it. And after they awarded the prize, Virgil went straight over, like beeline for the losing designers to talk to them and console them and give them advice and to pep them up a bit. And in that conversation, he said multiple times that they should call him, that he'll give them his number. And he all but begged them to reach out. He was like, please stick around. I will give you my number. I want you to talk to me. I want you to stay in touch with me. And that makes you realize how many designers he did that with. And it makes it so devastating that those designers that he talked to, they won't have that person to mentor them or to bounce ideas off of. Like, they were probably so psyched to have that opportunity, and they just won't now. And it's even more devastating to imagine the countless future designers who won't have that opportunity either. At this point, I don't know what else to say. I know that I wouldn't have the point of view I do about fashion if it weren't for Virgil. He created that pathway from streetwear to luxury fashion that I walked on to get here and to develop the style that I have today. And maybe now we can stop getting so caught up in the new releases and drops and hype Nike collabs, even though they're often pretty sick, and just look over the ways that he transformed our world, the world that all of us love so much. There's this Virgil-sized hole in that world now. And I bet a lot of people will say that hole will never be filled. But I really hope that's not true. It's clear that he did everything he could to set things up so that countless young designers of color can fill that hole he's left. So, Mr. Abloh, you will be missed dearly. But I sincerely look forward to seeing the changes that you started take hold and transform the industry you dominated by sheer force of will and creativity. That's all I got. Love each other, hug your friends, and be happy. There's nothing more precious than time. Bye, y'all.